Hi, I'm Alexis, and I've chosen to look into homelessness as a human rights issue here in Aotearoa. I'll first give an overview of our homeless statistics before explaining the basis for human rights claims, and I'll describe the UN findings on why the global housing crisis is occurring before moving on to our own policies and why they're not working. I'll then explore alternative policy suggestions which are founded in welfare society theories, that morality is a core element of human rights, and that we should keep morality part of our application of those rights. According to our Homelessness Insights report 2 years ago, over 110,000 of us were severely housing deprived, and of those, nearly 5,000 didn't have any form of shelter. This figure is estimated to be increasing at a rate more quickly than our population is growing. That is, we're not just running out of houses because more people are immigrating and being born, something else is at play. It's important to note these figures, particularly living without shelter, are underreported. That is, the true numbers are higher. Because most of the data is collected from the census, it's really difficult to tell how many more people are living in their car or on the streets. One of the interesting things about the issue of homelessness is that there seems to be little contention that having a home is a human right. Scholars aren't arguing that an adequate standard of living isn't something that everyone should have, and it's not in contention with other human rights. The most relevant human rights provision is Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This article states everyone has a right to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. The Special Rapporteur of the UN and academics like Lynch and Cole emphasize that the right to an adequate standard of living also overlaps with other human rights breaches, such as the right to health and the right to social security, which are provided for in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. For this presentation, we're just going to focus on the main claim, that is, the right to an adequate standard of living. Aotearoa, New Zealand ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in 1978. Why then do we have so many people living on the street and in inadequate housing, and why is the prevalence increasing? The issue isn't that our government is denying that homeless people have human rights, and that those rights aren't being observed. The issue, rather, is that the current solutions to address homelessness just aren't working. We have a conflict between properties and economic interest, and housing is a social issue. The United Nations published a report of the Special Rapporteur, which summarized the global housing crisis and the factors contributing to the issue. The Special Rapporteur, at the time Leilani Farah, linked the global housing crisis to growing socioeconomic inequality, large-scale financialization, and housing systems treating housing as if it were a commodity. That is, just a product to trade and sell. Two key areas of concern, specifically in the context of homelessness, were unaffordability of housing and the lack of regulations for private developers and investors. These global concerns of the UN are in line with our national concerns of our own government. The Homelessness Insights report identified 7 reasons for our increase in homelessness, 3 of which were unemployment, lack of appropriate housing, and rental inflation. The report of the Special Rapporteur also set out guidelines for implementing the right to adequate housing as part of the right to the adequate standard of living. The purpose of these guidelines is to inform states of their human rights obligations regarding housing and to provide ways to address the housing crisis. 16 guidelines were given in total, but as we'll look at shortly, it's Guideline 12 where it seems that Aotearoa's approach to homelessness is unraveling. Guideline 12 is to ensure the regulation of businesses in a manner consistent with state obligations and address the financialization of housing. When corporations and investors buy up too much of the affordable housing and potential social housing properties, those with lower socioeconomic status can be displaced. States should be protecting against this and the regulating rental inflation, but instead many are giving tax breaks to these investors and setting up the system to favor wealthy housing. The Special Rapporteur states that when businesses provide goods that are also human rights, they should be subject to more regulation than ordinary businesses providing other goods and services. Housing should primarily be a matter of social welfare, not a commodity. Here in Aotearoa, the government policy statement on housing and urban development recognizes that homelessness is a significant issue that needs to be resolved, and it lists several priorities to address inadequate standards of living. I focus on just 3 of them as they're directly related to regulating businesses and the financialization of housing addressed in Guideline 12. First, houses should be seen as homes, not as financial assets. Shane Mulva studied the financialization of housing in Auckland, and he lays out this conflict in some detail. Our economic market is built on the fundamental notion that land must be privatized and capitalized upon for the rental value which can be gained from it, with the market rate for rental prices increasing more quickly than many renters can keep up with. It's a unique situation in which one can exploit someone else's income, based solely on property ownership and not labor production. Ultimately, renters who fail to keep up with rental prices incur debt through the government in order to move into emergency housing to avoid homelessness. Instead of viewing homeownership as something which serves the primary purpose of providing a financial return, he argues the housing market should be governed in such a way that providing shelter and safety should take precedent. Unless one can get themselves out of the rental cycle and into ownership of their own home, they're continuously at the mercy of those more powerful in society. That is, the elite of society benefit financially at the expense of those members of society with lower incomes than themselves. So the issue with our policy here is that without the implications for the people who are using houses as financial assets, what does this policy even mean? Second, houses should meet adequate standards of being safe and healthy. Many of us have lived experience of this situation. We live in rentals in Dunedin. We see the failed rental warrant of fitness intervention attached to our agreement. We get some excuse about how it's all legitimate because plans are in place to fix the issue by the end of the year, and unless you want to keep looking for another flat, which will inevitably also have inadequate standards, you sign the contract. Give it another year or two, and you or someone you know moves into the same flat. Sure enough, it still fails the standard, and it's still upheld as just fine. Maybe you could take them to the tenancy tribunal, but you lose the reference you need from them for next year's rental. And would anything really change? According to a study by Pierce and colleagues, probably not. The Well Homes Initiative has led to many successful interventions for people living in government-run housing, but private landlords were the greatest barrier to houses being improved. So with the Healthy Homes Initiative changing little in practice for those in the rental market, what else would the government do to ensure enforcement of their second policy? Third, more affordable homes should be built. Academics like Scally and Teague describe how there's a pushback against ideas such as more public housing being built in or near nicer neighborhoods, because people in those neighborhoods can have a sort of entitled, not in my backyard, or NIMBY mindset. This often causes progress to come to a halt, and eventually social housing projects are built exclusively in low socioeconomic neighborhoods, further marginalizing people who need housing support. To put it fairly crudely, if the rich don't want to see the poor are housed out of sight. So where would these homes be built? Would they be integrated evenly into society, or would they be limited to marginalized neighborhoods? The solution feels kind of obvious, right? There's a growing gap of inequality between homeowners and renters, and something has to change. So what would happen if we put morality back into the human rights application? To explore this, I return to Lewis Henkin's Welfare Society. Remember this guy from week 3? Henkin was one of the godfathers of modern liberal human rights and argued from a natural law perspective that human rights are both political and moral. Henkin described the modern welfare society as one in which the government functions to benefit each of its individual citizens by way of social contract. He submitted that in cases where certain citizens do not have their basic needs met, that the government owes an obligation to meet those needs on their behalf. As a solution to achieve this, Henkin underlines the example of taxation as a political moral principle by which those who are better off assist people who don't have their basic needs met. Henkin's argument was that of social justice. We should invest in remedying social issues on the grounds of morality and human rights. In contrast, the modern approach to gaining public support for inadequate housing policies is often that of social investment. We should invest in social issues because it saves us all money in the long run. Francesco Laruffa, who also argues that morality and social welfare are essential to human rights, makes 2 criticisms against the social investment approach. On a practical level for homelessness, it is unrealistic to expect quick economic returns from people going into employment, and it puts undue pressure on services and affected individuals to achieve a quick turnover of outcomes in a process that requires time and considerable care. On a more systemic level, to push the economic agenda is to continue to ignore the social justice concerns. The foundational concept of human rights is that we should care, and caring should remain part of the reason for the solution, or else the homeless will continue to be marginalized, and what's the point of human rights anyway? As a final closing comment, Henkin argued that the human rights were the responsibility of all members of society, not solely the government. That is, we as individual beneficiaries of the system ought to willingly relinquish some of our own rights and freedoms in some uncertain blend of justice and equitable life satisfaction for all. Perhaps this could be achieved through Laruffa's suggestions of implementing higher taxation on additional home ownerships, legislating restrictions on rental charges, and allocating more government funding to Housing New Zealand and community housing providers. But perhaps there's a call for action on an individual level. If we benefit from the system enough that we can buy our own food, are we morally obliged to contribute to community food banks? As future lawyers with a stable income and extensive legal knowledge, should we be petitioning the government more strongly and advocating for more human rights? Maybe I infer more than Henkin intended to suggest, but if morality is truly a pillar of human rights, at what point does morality end? Should it end with a burden on the government alone, or does it trickle down through those of us who benefit most from society, and place some amount of burden on our shoulders? I don't have those answers, so I'll leave that with you. Thanks for listening, good luck with exams, and if you're interested in my references, they're in the description. Bye!